new speaker.
Sorry.
For the time being, while I'm just going through these formalities, I won't be looking at your faces. So if when I ask the questions, if you could just say your name when I call the question. So an approval of the agenda. Would somebody like to move the approval of the agenda?
I'll move it.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, I lost the sheet now. Sorry, there it is. Adoption of the minutes from Mayor's Task Force meeting number 1, moved by, say your name.
Sure.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So that's it for the formalities. Now I can see your faces. And with that, I will turn it over to Rodney and Jackie at this point to run with it.
Can everyone see that, the slideshow?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now I need to make sure if I can control it. Okay, bear with me. Oh, I can. How about that? 1 sec. There we go. Okay. Rodney, did you want to preface or Jackie on this title page, or should we just move into it?
I think we can just go into it, and I can sort of set it up a little bit. So hi everybody. It's nice to see you all again. As Mike said, we've been pretty busy the last few weeks trying to do our homework well that we took away from the last task force, and pour all of what we've learned in other consulting projects and other task forces like this that Jackie and I and Jill and Nikki and Mike have been involved in to make sure we're respecting everyone's time really well, and make sure that we're getting Mike and the village what they're really looking for out of this task force, and that we're all involved in something that we can be really proud of and really motivated about. And I'll get into sort of sharing back some of the details and some of the places we landed and how we got there in a second. But we were spending a lot of time talking about process and talking about how best we can collaborate and how we can really maximize, these meetings that we do together. And one of the things we talked about was, at least for the foreseeable future, I'm going to guess that we're probably not going to be able to do this in person for a little while. And so we're going to be on Zoom for a long time. And 2-hour Zoom meetings, I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, but sort of my idea of hell. I love to be able to sit in a room where I can see people, and, it's easier to engage. And at the business that I'm involved in, we've actually been working like this around the world across time zones for about 10 years. And everyone that we meet with on the client side or, in our team is always new to meetings like this. And I don't know what everyone else's experience is, but one of the things that we thought would be helpful would be to bring back sort of some basic ground rules for Zoom meetings, that everyone, if we're all starting at a different baseline with these types of things, we can all sort of align to. So it's basic meeting stuff, but just stuff that we often forget when you're on the computer at home or out and about or trying to fit in a meeting. So being really respectful of each other's time, eliminate distractions, and try to be really present. Simple things like make sure you don't have a bunch of web browsers open at the same time when people are asking for your input. Wherever possible, we've always found it to be really helpful when leaving video on. And if you do have your video on, obviously, I think we all get it, but I'm going to say the obvious and have face pointed at camera, or camera pointed at face, maybe is a better way to put it. Sitting still, not too many distractions. Although at some point you'll probably get to meet my 2-year-old daughter who's running around. Mute your microphone when you're not talking is a really helpful tip. And I think we're all pretty much doing that by default, but it just cuts out echoes and background noise, especially when a lot of us aren't using headphones. And then, make sure you're stationary as well. And if you can't be stationary, if you have to dial in on a phone for some reason, perhaps consider having a video off, because it can get super distracting for everyone else if one person's walking around or moving around. Those are sort of basic Zoom etiquette that we just wanted to start with. Does anyone have a problem with any of those basic ground rules or want to add any others? Can everyone sort of align to that and see the benefit of as sort of committing to working in that way for as long as we have to use Zoom?
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Okay, Jill, you need to read my mind about slide going forward.
I'll wait for silence.
So we ended up going around in a number of circles, as often happens when you think about process and what we're actually trying to achieve and what the brief is for this group. And one thing that really helped us, as I sort of report back on where we landed, is I actually went back to the original post that we obviously all, everyone in this task force responded to. And for some reason, we're drawn towards that. And I think really what we ended up doing was putting some further definition of thinking around how best we can support the village and support Mike in obviously what we're going to have to manage in the near term and future, and then whatever comes beyond that. So I actually ended up pulling out of that post some of the key asks and putting them on this slide here. So the asks of the task force we're looking for our community, our creative thinkers and problem solvers to help us develop a community approach to recovery. So, creative thinking, problem solving, community-based response were some of the things that jumped out at me. Collective brains trust was another thing that was in that post. And I always find in my own projects and work that I often forget what the original ask was. And this is why it's a good exercise for us to go back and remind ourselves about what we signed up for. Working side by side with community members, again, that community-based approach. And one thing that was really abundantly clear was the aim of making Pemberton stronger than ever. And I heard from a lot of other people on the task force in the last meeting, that a lot of us really wanted to be here for something bigger than just immediate recovery. And I think that's probably captured in a lot of the words that Mike and the village used to set up the task force. And so one of the things that came out of the last meeting was that, in an ideal world, there would be a really clear vision for the community that we could use as a lens in any initiatives or any decisions we have to make, or any recommendations that we put forward to the council and to the mayor. And, we identified a gap that it isn't there. There isn't a clear vision. And maybe that's something we want to work on. But as we dug into it, we thought, with the time that we have with this committee, and how extensive that is, that it's probably biting off more than we should chew within this framework. But that led us to a really good insight in terms of bringing forward a process to suggest on how we can best use the group and, best work together. So we wanted to have a little bit of a North Star for the committee. In lieu of having one for the community, we thought, what if we take that original ask that we all responded to and use the charter of make Pemberton stronger than ever as sort of our guiding North Star for everything we do. So as a way to scale, and so that each of us can make decisions, that we always just keep in the back of our mind that when we're making recommendations or giving input, that's really why we've come together, is to make Pemberton stronger than ever. And there were some aspects of that we wanted to just unpackage and suggest and see if everyone can support that as part of this task force. That there's a level of accountability within that, both in terms of being accountable to each other in terms of the basic stuff, like doing what we promise we'll do, but also in a bigger picture, it's with all the many problems or opportunities that we're going to uncover, either directly in this group or by sounding out our own networks or through formal surveys. It's going to be way more than the village could chew off on their own, right? It's just going to be far too much for, Mike and the team at the village to be able to do. But we we also saw, and maybe other people have seen this as well, but we also saw anecdotally some other people who didn't make it on the task force, who are very, motivated to make the community stronger, who would love to be involved. And so we started thinking about this group as a conduit towards being able to engage the community to flip inside out the problem solving and be able to, make the community stronger in a slightly more formal or systematic way than happens organically. And that's really where the process came from. So we've got the village who's enabled the task force. And what we're wondering is if this task force can be the conduit to really engaging the whole community. And that was kind of what was asked for. So accountability being important, really being forward looking. There's always a ton of stuff that's happened in the past, things that we wish we had done, recommendations were made to council in the past that maybe didn't get acted upon. Now's a chance to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, often in a crisis, all the good ideas that have been brought forward before, all the things that have been suggested, people start looking around for those and they pick them up. And that's when they can actually get action. So staying really forward looking and solutions orientated. And then the last part, really leveraging the community. So, through our own individual networks or other people who may already be working on some aspect of problems that will surface, we can use this task force to engage with those people and have them be part of a wider effort. So that's sort of the setup to the process.
Coming.
It's okay. My dramatic pauses are the cue to change.
There we go.
So if everything I've just explained makes sense, then what we were thinking in terms of how we can best use our time together, and there'll be an opportunity for questions and feedback, but I'll just sort of get through the main crux of things first before I start, is that our primary role being to surface problems. So we already started doing that off the top of our heads in the last meeting. We've probably gone away and thought about more. Perhaps other people have started talking to their own networks and friends and family within the community. And we're also going to do that in a formal way through, polling the wider community. And then as a task force, we map those problems. So many of the things we identified may not actually be root cause problems. They may just be a symptom of a bigger problem. And so really spending some time to understand that before we get off and start solving things is an important step. So we surface problems and then we map problems. And then what we can do to scale ourselves so that we're not coming together every 2 or 4 weeks and trying to solve big, difficult problems that maybe not everyone's interested in, is we actually start scaling the work that we do by assigning someone in this committee to take responsibility for a problem that we want to work on. And that person can then recruit others from within this group or from the village or other organizations relevant to the problem to start thinking about how we can create solutions to that and bring those solutions back to us. See if we can strengthen them or move any roadblocks by this, through this task force, make an action plan, and then use our monthly meetings of this task force to sort of come back and report progress against those problems, any roadblocks, and anything we may want to communicate out to the community about progress and success, all within the overarching goal of how do we make Pemberton stronger than ever, as sort of the thing we're always keeping in the back of our mind as we're working. So the idea being that this task force can really scale by us dividing and conquering and enlisting support from other people who'd love to be sitting here where you guys all are. And so one example of how that process could run was this idea of needing a community vision. And so instead of us all trying to spend a whole bunch of time building and making a process for leading a community vision, what we suggest is we treat that as just one problem we've uncovered. So, Jill mentioned, or Mark mentioned in the last meeting that tourism needs help communicating. Jill, one of the things you've mentioned as we worked through this was, you really, really feel overwhelmed by communication. And, you know, like I said earlier, this is far too much for your team to manage on your own. This is just too big. But by the same token, in our community, it's very special in that there's tons and tons of people who want to help. So let's use this task force as the cavalry to enlist that help. And so the quote that you used on the post to recruit task force members was the one up on the screen. You know, there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. So perhaps one of the initiatives that we work on is that community vision. But instead of trying to do it within the task force, we just specify that as one thing that's been uncovered that needs to be delegated to someone to lead. They enlist a team and go figure out how to make that happen and keep the task force updated about where they're at and how that's running so that we actually move some things forward. So perhaps this is good, Jill, maybe this is a good place for us to just pause quickly and see if there's questions and see what everyone's thoughts are about using the task force in that way. And if that seems like why people signed up and a good use of our time.
Sure. Did we want to just open it up? If anyone wants to speak, maybe just put up your hand and then we can go around that way. Stuart?
Go ahead, unmute. When was the last time that the official community plan was updated? Is that available on the site as well right now?
Nikki, do you want to speak? Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a few years ago. It was finalized, I believe in 2011. Prior year and a half to that, there was a significant amount of work. It is on our list to start to kick off again in the fall this year. But it is available on our website.
What kind of process does that involve from the Muni?
There's a significant amount of public consultation. So the last round that we did is we looked at a multi-pronged approach in communicating. We held meetings that we invited people to, but then we also went into people's small groups, whether they were homes or it was an organization, surveys, I think there were door-to-door questionnaires. So we would want to, you know, replicate what we did or do more, do better last time. So as you all are probably aware, when we were going through our budget process is that council did make steps to come in at a zero-based budget. So we did have to defer some of our projects. One was the official community plan as far as the consultants that we would hire to assist us. But internally, we are going to start some of the processes, whether it be for affordable housing or other kickoff events that we're already sort of working on to help formulate how we're going to lead off the OCP.
So that could be some of the outcome from this group would be some influence on some of the opportunities for town.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in there, Nikki. Absolutely, Stuart. And we talked about this the other day. Obviously, the OCP is that guiding document that captures a lot of the vision that Rodney was talking about, right? What is the vision of our community? So we talked about it a little bit, and I'm interested to see how we would navigate it. There's definitely some overlap there in the sense that the work that Rodney's suggesting is definitely similar to the work of the OCP. So I don't think it's redundant. I think this will actually help, like you say, inform the OCP process and yeah, I mean, it would be nice if our OCP were already more updated and then we could just pull off of that and as a starting point. But we, you know, our starting point is, I don't want to say outdated, but it's a few years old. So we do have to, I think if we do this in tandem, it'll work quite well.
And just to make sure everyone knows what the OCP is, right? Okay, I'll circulate a link to our current OCP in a following email.
Stuart, it's a really good point, and actually mirrors something that we talked about. Was we don't want to, you know, duplicate anything that's already happening. We just want to really strengthen everything that's going on and connect things that are going on. And so, if you come back to that process that, you know, we're suggesting, we surface a problem or a challenge or an opportunity as part of the group, and someone says, yeah, you know what, you know, as a group, we sort of decide that is important, that we need to work on that. So using the example, we need a really clear vision or North Star for the community. So who in the community is already working on something like that or would be interested in that? Well, obviously there's the OCP that's being worked on. You know, Nikki would be a key person to have involved. And maybe the outcome is actually we don't need to lead anything ourselves. We just give a little bit of input into that in terms of, you know, for example, Nikki, when you're building the description of the scope for that project, can you make sure we really dial up the need for a vision at the front end of it, right? So that would be a way that we can really scale our efforts and be really efficient and not be stepping in the wrong places or treading on turf that we shouldn't be treading on.
It's interesting. I've had a lot of anecdotal conversations from people since I've taken on the chamber position, just really wanting that vision and feeling like, you know, they want to be a part of it. They want to, you know, feel we need a vision. So like, it's definitely something I'm hearing from around town as well. So it does make sense that that could be something on our list and that there's a need for it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's identity as much as vision too, that bringing that, you know, not that we all have the same identity here in Pembroke, but we share one for sure. And how does that look, right? So I think you're right, Meredith. I think there is an appetite for that. You know, I think it would be a good example of one of the I call them the subcommittees of this group here. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on this part? Okay.
Judith? No, I think it's a great idea, and I think by everybody going to either their groups or their collective neighbors, whatever, it just only enhances what you're going to come up with. And I think you'll get a much broader idea of what the current population of Pemberton wants.
A question I have just about our sort of where our mandates fall, like we've got Pemberton, the village, you know, obviously this is what the task force is around, and then we've still got the surrounding area. I'm assuming anything that comes from this needs to be focused on the village only. Is that a correct assumption?
I mean, I don't think we can separate the village from the valley and the rest of the community here. We're sort of all tied together. It's a good question, and we thought and looked at it when we were trying to put the membership of this committee together. You know, so yes, it's village oriented. It's, you know, a lot of actions will come back to council for consideration. So it is all, you know, we are sort of the hub of it at the village. However, there's tourism throughout our valley. There's mental health issues throughout our valley. So a lot of the work we're going to be working on, I feel, will extend to the greater valley. And it's always going to be important for us to keep that in mind, and right through to obviously First Nations as well, right? The work that we're doing, you know, I think it's important we keep in our heads, how does it impact our neighbors, and where do we need to coordinate with them on some of the work we're doing? But there's no way we can keep it limited to just the VOP.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. If I could just add a comment, I think part of this committee come out of the village is we only have the authority to make decisions on behalf of the village. So whether or not we have communication, or we reach out, spin off other groups, or we're liaising, that's where we can definitely assist. But as far as making decisions, that was one of the limitations of having other groups and expanding, whether it be the regional district or the What Nation or Naquaqua. We know we need to discuss and consult and make share information, but we were just limited.
I think that's a really good point. And Nikki, Mike, Ryan, Meredith, those of you who know the inner workings of sort of the wider Pemberton Valley, when we're shortlisting problems and picking teams to work on those problems, one of the places you can steer us really carefully is to make sure anyone that can have influence in that problem is involved in defining the problem and thinking through solutions, so that they're really coming for the journey. Because one of the things you identified last time is something I've seen all over the world, where you can't actually make decisions and control things, right? When you're managing a community, there's thousands of us with hundreds of organizations. And the sum of all those incremental behaviors and decisions is ultimately what lands us where we want to go. And if everyone can be part of shaping and defining that end direction, there's more chance of getting there. Because when you're sitting at work in one of the organizations that can have an impact, the decisions you make will be made through a lens of, well, actually, remember, that's the direction we said we wanted to go as a community. Right? So that's a really key thing that you can help with.
So sorry, go ahead, Meredith.
I was just going to say that makes total sense to me. I think that, Rodney, what you just said is so important, that once we all kind of are on the same path, everybody starts making decisions and going down it together, and things just start to happen.
Yeah, and like I'll give you guys. I live in this world, so stop me if this just is abundantly obvious. But there's two really good examples. Quick show of hands, has anyone been to Nashville in Tennessee? Okay, so Nashville sort of went through this process, and they'd be like an example of best practice that actually did it formally and not organically. And about 20 years ago, one of the guys who he still runs the tourism board there now, but he engaged a group a lot like this to say, like, what do we want to be as a place? And they went through a process. They engaged all the stakeholders in the community, and they were left with a choice that sort of arose through the process. Do we want to be Music City, or do we want to be Healthcare City? And it was a really genuine choice that everyone was really wrestling with. And they obviously landed on Music City, and they still attract a ton of healthcare business. But what it's done is it's given the place a North Star. So when everyone's making little decisions, you can see it flow through the community now, and they've created an identity and a brand. And it's a bit simplistic as an example, but it makes it easy. You go into any of the big hotel chains, and anyone who's been involved in the hotel business knows how hard it is to deviate from what comes top down. But you go into the hotel chains, and all the decor is music related. You get into a taxi, and the taxi driver's showing you their latest album as they're taking you to wherever you go, and the experience of living there or visiting there is pretty much in line with that vision, and it's quite organic. And the other example is this is probably the best example, and it's super wacky on purpose. But there's a little town in just above the Arctic Circle in northern Finland that I've been able to go to twice through work, and it's called Rovaniemi, and they've got a big airport left over from some military investments that were made there. That's long enough for pretty big planes to land. But the community was really, really dying. It was a resource community, and it was sort of coming to the end of its lifespan in terms of industry. And in the 70s, they got together, and there was some pretty strong leadership from a small group in the community. And they said, look, we're going to have to do something. And they said, well, we're above the Arctic Circle. Someone came up with the idea of becoming the hometown of Santa Claus. And so when we got picked up from the airport, this is, about 5 years ago. So they've been pursuing this vision for 30 or 40 years. So you can imagine that, there's a whole generation of people who've been born into the whole hometown of Santa Claus, and that's what they know. And it permeates the entire community. And so we got off the airplane and got into the car of the people from the city who drove us to where we were going in the hotel. And we started driving through the town, and I couldn't tell if I was living in make-believe or reality, because they started pointing out the window and said, oh, this suburb here is where most of the elves live. And genuinely, they have about 300 volunteer elves in the community who do different things throughout the year. And most of them just happen to live in that one suburb. So that part was true. And we kept driving, and I said, that's Santa's house. And that really is where the guy who year-round plays Santa and all the people come to visit lives there. And then you drive past Santa's post office. It's a real tourist attraction, and et cetera, it keeps going. But there's still snowmobile operators, and there's people who run cafes and everything else, but they've just got this consistent vision. I'm not suggesting we turn Pemberton into the hometown of Santa Claus. The only reason I say those examples is we have an opportunity right now to actually proactively define what we want to be as a place that very few places can ever actually do. And so that's kind of the point.
Okay, so with all that said, and as this is a potential subcommittee or subgroup, how do we walk through the next steps here?
Oh, good segue.
Yeah, thanks. I went to chair school.
So, Jill, is it worth ticking off an agenda item and getting, or maybe Nikki, this is your job to get Mike to do the thing where we decide whether that process that we just walked through is something we want to formalize?
We can do that. To be honest, I'm trying to determine how, if this committee, this would need to be a recommendation of council that supports this on this process. So we can definitely put forward a motion to that effect, that the committee recommends to council that the process described at the meeting, Ellie helped me with the wording, be approved or supported.
And by that process, are we talking about sorry,
With the establishment of subcommittees?
Yeah, we haven't gotten there. Well, I mean, we haven't really sort of explained that. And why don't we go through this next steps bit, Rodney, and then Nikki can sort of speak to like how we marry it back to council.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so if everything we've talked about so far makes sense, then what needs to happen from here is, and this is intended to happen later on in this conversation, we draft the question that we want to go out to the community with and get all of your input to help Jill to be able to do that this week so that we can keep adding to our list that we're building. And then once we've got a critical mass of responses, we were sort of thinking when there's 50, we can start to map those, cluster them, analyze, and then prioritize what we want to work on. And that's something that, you know, Mike and Nikki and Jill can really guide us on where the priorities are. And we can put everything else in the parking lot just in case this works. And we start sort of creating a bit of a flywheel where we're able to surface problems, analyze them, map them, and then delegate them to some part of the community. So then after this meeting, the question would go out. When we've got enough responses to the question, we can map them into a Google document, and each of us can put our name next to a problem that we're interested in working on, either in a supporting or leading capacity. Those small groups can then connect, whether it's in a video meeting or a in-person meeting, or just, you know, within email or a document, to really define the problem. Build a team to work on the problem with, you know, thinking through this group, like who else in the community might be working on that or interested in it, to start to get a sort of core subgroup together. And then we can bring those back, run them past Mike to make sure that he's good with it and whatever needs approving through council. And then the group can head off, brainstorm solutions, create a plan, and I just realized I need to explain what a 730 90-day plan is, but create a plan that actually moves us into action. There's a lot of information here, so I'm going to park what a 730 90-day plan is, and we can just come back to that when it's relevant, maybe in a small group meeting. But so that's what we were thinking about from here. So we surface more problems and opportunities. We map them out and prioritize them. So we've got a list of, let's say, 5 that we want to start working on. And then we organize ourselves into those subgroups and use these regular meetings every 3 or 4 weeks to report back on progress, explain to everyone what roadblocks we're encountering to see if the big group can help us to move some of those roadblocks out of the way somehow, and do ask for helps. And then we can ask for help, and then we can also communicate back to the wider community what we're doing and what we're working on. I guess it's another good chance to pause to see if that makes sense as sort of the next month.
Yeah, this is a key one. And can you put us back to the full screen here so I could see everyone?
Yeah, for sure.
This is a key pause here. You know, this is a big sort of step or a big direction. So we'd love to hear from people if this makes sense, if the what we're calling the subcommittee system makes sense to everybody. Again, as Rodney said, you know, once we've identified some of these opportunities and challenges, you know, whether it's 3 or 5 or more, big or small, identify what we would like to work on, and then bring people from our own community. So, you know, Aaron, you have much different contacts than, say, Mark or myself or whatever. So, you know, the hope is, oh yeah, I would like to enlist so-and-so and bring them along. And that's how the subcommittees are formed. Or maybe you don't know anybody and you want to work on something different. So, you know, within this committee, we'll be able to make suggestions. Like Rodney said earlier, there was a number of applicants for the committee that would still like to help. So we have a bit of a list of names and resources we could add to some of these. So as a starting point, it would be identify them and then sort of tick off where we would like to see ourselves working. So does this part of the process make sense to everybody? Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, just wondering, you know, when we ask the question, when we're trying to gather information on needs assessment, can we also include part of that? Would you want to be part of being, you know, involved in these subcommittees? Could we propose that?
I think the way, depending on what platform we use to ask the community question, I don't know if we can include that, but certainly I think through the village networks and all the networks here, we can certainly ask that question of our networks through everybody here to get more people. I know there's definitely pretty much everybody that did apply for the Mayor's Task Force is definitely interested in being involved in some capacity. So we can certainly start there. And then if we're finding that we're needing more of that collective brain trust or, you know, boots on the ground, we can definitely expand through the village networks and your own networks. The other thing I just wanted to add to, Rodney, I'm not sure if you touched on this too, is we talked about whether, you know, we keep that community question out for 2 weeks, or perhaps there could be some benefit to just leaving it open in general, because as we know, COVID is changing rapidly and is presenting new challenges and opportunities weekly. So what we thought is maybe we would just keep that community question open. And then, you know, as things arise, people can add to that list. So we talked about it, and we felt leaving it as a living document would be really helpful. Does everyone feel okay with that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And we were trying to look for ways to adapt as whatever unfolds in our future unfolds, and B, like, get action going quickly and not needing to wait for a certain period to have an end date. And we sort of realized there's actually no reason to close it off, right? They can just leave it there, and, you know, probably you'll see a distribution where there's a ton of responses in the first few days, and then it'll wane. And you know, you can always, Jill, use this as a tool to reduce your workload in communications at the village by just saying, oh yeah, great, you've got a suggestion, terrific, we've got a place for you to put that. So
yeah, and I imagine too, like, we could probably leverage some key changes, like whether there's an order, excuse me, an order lifted or enacted, or, you know, we go to another level. You know, that would sort of be my trigger to remind people to be like, hey, how is this impacting you? Let us know through.
Maybe, sorry, Joe, were you done?
Yeah.
And maybe just to add a little bit to it, too, like, we're asking you how you feel about this process and the comfort level. The other thing, the other support that these subcommittees would have, and maybe I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here on you, Jackie, but you know, the committees would be given some tools through some of the people that we already have here, i.e. Jackie and Rodney, to help sort of approach the problem solving process with each of these committees. So it wouldn't be, okay, we formed a committee, Jay, you go off and you come back with some answers with whoever you're working with. Like, there's going to be tools given to all these committees and support for the committees to work through the process, just so you know. And maybe I don't know if you want to speak to it now, Jackie, or wait, but again, I just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the direction we're going in terms of how this committee is going to work. So Natalie, Jay, we haven't heard from you. Is everybody feeling good about this? That thumbs up.
Oh yeah, I'm just being quiet because it makes complete sense. It's fantastic to have a framework to establish how we work together and the process that unfolds. So it's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in?
And we are going to speak to, Jackie's going to speak to that support in the next couple of slides. Shall we move ahead? Are we good with that?
Yeah, so we can do the official processes towards the end across everything. I think there's just one more slide and then it's over to Jackie. So on the screen right now is a list of the things we've already surfaced. This is what came out of the quick test exercise that Jill ran in the last meeting. So already, there's 10 or more problems and opportunities that came up. And one of the things we want to be really careful to do is open our minds towards possibilities and not be too constrained, especially in the early stages of our work. We have a real opportunity. This team on this call is a powerhouse in itself, but the people we can engage can really lift pretty heavy things. So starting with a mindset of abundance thinking or open to possibilities is really important, and that's what Mike was referencing about how we want to try and work together in small groups when we're defining problems and tackling problems. So always keep coming back to the charter of how do we make Pemberton stronger? How do we stay accountable and not just expect someone else to do everything for us, but instead, how can the community make the community stronger itself? Using the village as an enabler, this committee is a conduit to the wider community, and the process that hopefully what we're laying out here works, or if we need to come back and refine it a little bit until we get something that's really working as a flywheel to have us, help to solve problems. So these are the ways that you all defined the things that you were already seeing in the community. And I think it's a really good segue over to you, Jackie, in terms of redefining them in a way that opens us up to possibilities.
All right, super, thank you. I think that the point that's really important here is to just say that you're not alone. So if there's one thing that this task group can do, and if Rodney and I have talked about this, we both use a very similar process, but we want to support you as you go off into your group to work on things, so that you're not just, hey, I've been working on the food bank issues for the last 15 years and we still haven't solved them. How will we do it now? The answers really are that we have a process and a framework, and we have some help that we can give you, more tools, I guess, because one of the things we thought about is that this would be an excellent opportunity to help build capacity among community leaders, which this task force is full of. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we use. So everybody talks about creative problem solving and brainstorming and coming up with solutions, but there's actually a framework in which to do it that's been very, very well researched. And it started by, probably most of you have watched maybe, or at least know the movie Mad Men. So two of the people that used to work on Madison Avenue were really curious about how creative problem solving occurred, and they did a bunch of research around creative behavior. And so from that, a framework was developed, and it has a lot to do with divergent and convergent thinking, which is basically brainstorming. So the term brainstorming, if you wonder where that came from, because we use that term around the world, it was Alex Oswald and Sid Parnes, who were the two people that started the Creative Education Foundation. And so these are the tools that we're going to support you guys with. So the first thing we need to think about is taking problem statements. And that's why I was really hesitant last week when we had the question, what are all the things that could go wrong? We want to reframe that so that we can start thinking about how we can restate a problem statement to turn it into a new way of thinking. And what we're really doing is opening up neural pathways to see opportunities, not blocks. And so as soon as we start reframing and we start using different verbiage, it leads to opportunities. So, okay, so here are just a few of the statements that we use a lot, which are, in what ways might we? and up until now, and yes, and obviously not no but, and wouldn't it be nice if, and let's imagine, and how might we? So this kind of language, instead of saying we don't have enough seats or enough space for childcare, we just reframe that and say, in what ways might we create more opportunities for childcare? But we wouldn't say it once, we say it repeatedly, and we keep coming up with, and it sounds a little bit like we're coming up with ideas, but really what we're doing is we're coming up with new ways to state the problem. So this is really key. So one of the things that we start with is just changing the way that we say things in order to open up the world of infinite possibilities. And then that's what Mike was saying when he was talking about an abundance mentality, which is super hard to do when everywhere you look, you see a problem and you're in the middle of a crisis, which is what we're in right now. So we're in a crisis situation that is very serious, and people have lost not just lives, but livelihood. And when we think about, you know, it's not just turning it around and being like Pollyanna, it's actually thinking about the things that are in front of us and how we can start thinking differently. And so this is this idea, and I'm going to maybe just on this slide, just mention, there's 3 things that are really key whenever we're doing any creative problem solving. And they are, number 1, interest. So don't go on a committee if you're not super interested in it, because being interested in it means that you'll be passionate about it, and it's something that speaks to your, you know, the core of who you are. So let's say you're working on one project, or your job has to do with something, but something else looks really interesting to you. Don't feel badly about switching and letting somebody else who might be interested in, let's say, the topic that you might be responsible for, perhaps working on that. And this is what we're really gonna talk about. We're gonna cross-pollinate teams. And so having people with diverse backgrounds on a team is better. So not just thinking about finding all the people that are experts in one field, but it's also bringing in an artist, bringing in a scientist, bringing in somebody who's a geographer. Those people will look at things quite differently. So as an example, Disney works quite often with the Jet Propulsion Lab, just as an idea of astronauts and Walt Disney working together in order to solve problems. So thinking about putting those teams together. So the first one's interest. The second one is influence. So there'll be no point us working on a problem that we can't change. So there would be no point if we all got together and we decided that we needed to, I don't know, change the government, but we don't have to do it, somebody else has to. So think about when we're working on something, it has to be something that we ourselves have, I'll say, sway to do, which comes back to Nikki's point about constraints. There are some constraints that we'll need to know about, and that'll really help guide us as we start thinking about what we're going to work on. And then the third I is imagination. So we definitely want to be imaginative and creative and come up with, we don't want to do things that we've done before. We want to do things that perhaps really stretch us. And this is one of the ideas where this is where transformational change will come from. So is looking at things, because what happens when we're under stress, this is just basically the way our brain works. We are much more likely to do something that we tried before that didn't work than we are to go into the unknown and try something that's completely new that we're not sure about. And we're not talking about crazy ideas, we're talking about managed risk here, but we will make sure that we help people think about those things so that it can be more around what could be possible. And I know that you guys have probably watched the news and you see it all the time. It's called fixes that backfire. And you're like, why are they doing that? They should know that didn't work. And really often that's just because that's just the way our brains work. We're more likely to try something or just to change it slightly to see if it will work than to actually do something completely new. Okay, so really I think one of the things that we're all thinking about is what I call diagonal thinking, which really means that in anything we design or develop now, it's going to improve our situation after COVID. So it's not just it's not a Band-Aid for COVID. It's actually going to make us better. And as you know, the slide which we've lost, but the slide said it will make Pemberton stronger. Have we lost our slides there? Okay.
Jill, you're on mute there.
Sorry, one sec here.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I was just trying to get rid of my emails.
Well, that's okay. Well, maybe I'll just keep talking while we're trying to get the slides back up.
Yeah.
So we've got, this is a field that we work in. So even though my background is in mental health, and also I've got an extensive background working with the ministry around licensing of, you know, daycares, foster homes, adoption services. I work with youth in corrections. So that's my background, but this is a tool that we've used. It's an agnostic tool that goes into any industry. So we've used it in this region, we've used it with the food bank. We've used it to look at improving the situation around daycare in the city of Surrey. We've used it in the city of Burnaby. Just lots of different places that we've used it for. So I think that it's one of those agnostic tools that can fit in everyone's toolkit. And so, okay, so let's go to the next slide. And I'm just gonna really quickly show you the process that we use. So this is a creative problem solving process, and we've created, just happens that we've also created an assessment if anyone is curious about it. But as I speak to the process, maybe just listen and see if you can think about, from your own perspective, what area you find is more attractive or what you like the best. So in the inner circle, you can see the blue, yellow, orange, and green. Those are really the steps we take in a creative problem solving process. And then the words on the outside speak to a preference, and it's really a thinking style. So this is built off the back of a learning style. And so what we talk about is how we think. So how we think drives really how we feel. And then our feelings and emotions drive how we behave. And then how we behave really drives the results. So this is a little assessment we have. And if people are curious, we can give it to you. But I'll just walk through it to say the first step is problem identification. So that's the dark blue step. So we already did that. We went, oh, we have a problem. We've got COVID-19 and it's really shut the place down and it's, you know, it's affecting everyone. Then we did a little bit of fact finding. So that's when we went out, and all of you, thank you so much for all the information you sent back in. People definitely gave us some great information that Jill put into a document for us to look at. That really covers the facts. And the reason why the facts are important is that we need current, right now facts so we can understand the current situation that we're in. The next step, which is a step that most people skip because they don't understand it, and that is defining the problem. So often what happens is we solve the wrong problem. We think that the problem that we have is really the problem, and then we spend all this time coming up with ideas. And then we find out that the ideas that we generated actually don't solve the real problem. They solve some kind of a secondary or a surface problem, when the real problem is what ends up happening is it can be intractable. So it can go underground and come back again later, and then we're back solving another problem that's, let's say, dress up in a different outfit that is really the same, can't stem from the first problem that we had. So we do spend more time defining the problem. Einstein has, and I'm sure this is not exactly what he said, but it's close to it. He said, if I had an hour to solve the world, I would take the first 55 minutes to understand the problem and the last 5 minutes coming up with ideas and solutions. And what we tend to do is we find a problem, and then we quickly go and we brainstorm, we come up with the idea that we like best, that we think we can do, and we implement it. And so this is a pattern that we see over and over again, which we're going to slow it down, and we're going to show you how to go through these steps. Because then when you get to the idea stage, that's when you're going to brainstorm. But we're not done yet. Then we're going to measure and plan. And in the measuring and planning stage, with the ideas that we have, we're actually going to evaluate them, and we're going to strengthen and improve them. So we're going to shine up those ideas, make sure that they fit within the constraints that we have. So we'll go back and we'll look at the facts again. And then we'll come up with some kind of a plan. By the time we get to the planning stage, and this is one of the things that we'll probably be doing, is within this committee, we'll bring the ideas back, and maybe as a committee as a whole, we'll help to do the measuring and the planning, or it could happen in a small group and then happen once again when we get back to the bigger group where we have more brain power. But then normally what we would do is in the engage section, this is where we would engage stakeholders who can help us deliver everything so that when we get to action, we actually can take it and get it done. Because one of the worst things in the world, and I'm sure all of you have done this, gone to these meetings that are a big waste of time, and at the end of the day, you end up coming up with something that ends up having to be reworked, which drives me crazy, that rework of realizing, okay, we went down the road the wrong way. Somebody else has already done that, and now we have to redo it. So I think one of the benefits of following this process is that we'll be able to report back in, because the funny thing about problems that we've noticed is that we are a system. So here we are a system called Pemberton, and everything impacts everything else. So from systems thinking, you guys have already mentioned, and it was in one of the problem statements, the daycare is stopping people from going back to work because the daycare isn't open. Well, that is what we would call, that would be like a bottleneck, but there's probably bottlenecks that are actually impacting everyone. And then there's going to be solutions that will probably benefit everyone. And we're going to look at it within kind of a web. Nothing will sit in isolation. So we'll be looking at them all together as we go forward. Okay, so I think that's it for my slide. Yeah. I don't know whether people have questions about that or any comments, but.
Let's open it for any questions or thoughts before we go into the other question. Thoughts from the group? Nothing, we're all good. Jackie laid it out so clearly. Okay, again, a thumbs up from everybody. We're all good with the road we're taking here. Awesome.
Okay, we'll go back here.
Just to make sure that it's abundantly clear how that fits is we bring the problem, we surface the problems as part of this group, we break out into subcommittees, and then support will be given to those subcommittees in terms of defining a problem and how to tackle the problem, and then also how to make a plan that actually gives you a good chance of succeeding.
So I think, as we had mentioned, the next step is for me to go back and to refine that community question that we'll be issuing. So I think what I'm looking to the group to have some guidance around is what do you feel is most important for me to consider when reframing this community question, taking into consideration everything that Rodney and Jackie have touched on with respect to posing that question in a way that invokes creativity, imagination, and results. And again, the community question isn't going to be something specific. So like, it's not like, if you could change anything about childcare, what would it be? We wanted to keep this, again, a very sort of more general question, similar to the question that we had asked at our last Mayor's Task Force meeting, to sort of get a good gauge and take the temperature of the community of what is affecting them. So keeping it general, does anyone have any suggestions on providing some input on how I can reframe that question, or something that you think is important that should be part of that question?
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, I kind of, coming from my approach when I'm doing therapy, it's always kind of like coming from what would it look like if you didn't have your problems or challenges, or what would it look like if the defined problem didn't exist anymore? What would life look like for you? So kind of drawing on this, trying to turn things into a positive instead of it's not, we're not turning into a complaints department. And I think also offering a level of compassion and understanding that what people are going through is very significant. businesses, parents, we're all going through something that's really emotionally draining, physically draining. So offering like sort of, if we could tie in some compassion into it, as well as like, I don't know, this is just kind of things that I've been thinking about lately, is just like, how can we pose it in a way that it's not going to be all negative, and kind of get that creative piece, you know, people able to look and see what could be good, right? And start thinking about what they would need to kind of work through this. Just things off the top of my head.
I think that's really important, Erin, because you're sort of setting the context. Like, we don't want to look insensitive by saying, hey, like, what are all the opportunities with this? We definitely want, I totally agree that setting sort of the context, you know, saying that COVID has presented our community with, you know, significant hardships, and it has, you know, been very difficult for our, you know, our social, our mental well-being. It's caused, you know, I totally agree. I think we need to put some context in there and let people know that, you know, we know what everyone's feeling, and then moving into the question. So I'm totally on the same page with you on that one.
And I think if kind of going based on that, and like if you have like a caveat and before you pose the question, so that you are, you know, showing empathy to the community itself. But when I read this question, personally, I feel like it is very pointed. Like, I feel like you're not gonna get too many of the people that are gonna ask for the swimming pool and things like that. It's very specific, and to what we're trying to accomplish. So I think that if you do integrate a little bit of context in the beginning as to why we're sourcing community information, but being empathetic to the challenges that this has impacted the community as well, then going into the question, I think that people will be able to kind of understand where the village is coming from and what the purpose of answering this question is, and potentially filtering out, you know, complaints or, you know, asking for things that are probably not necessarily on this agenda.
And the other thing that we've kind of thought of too, it'll be interesting because it'll be a great exercise to see like how asking the question impacts the answer. So the initial question that we had asked the group at the last meeting was, you know, what are your most immediate needs and gaps? And then changing that to, you know, an opportunistic question. It's really interesting. I think it'll be a cool exercise for the group to see the difference in the answers and how the question really impacts what the outcomes of the answers are. So in other words, like how, you know, having that creative mindset, basically how it impacts the answer. So I think that'll be a really interesting exercise for us to sort of compare our answers from our last session to what the answers will be to the community question once we've refined it with that, you know, lens of infinite possibilities.
And I also think if you
Jill,
keep
I would
the
add
question,
to it. Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I think even if when you're keeping this question open to the public and not closing it off, and as we stated before, is that things are going to evolve as, you know, we head into the fall. It'll be interesting to see what people consider immediate needs at different stages. So that way we can better understand, because we're going to have different comments at this stage versus even a month from now to 2 months from now. And if we go back into a lockdown, it's going to be way different. So I think that if you keep that question open, you're going to see different needs arise. And I think the community will like that, and having their opportunity to voice what that looks like at different stages.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Was this community, or was this question brought through the framework that Jackie had originally, that shared on that first slide, how you might frame the statement so then it's able to get a broader view of what's going on, like
yes. So that
like
first question we asked at our last meeting, nope, it was not brought through any process. It was just sort of a question I had made up, and it was more for the it was twofold. It was to sort of test out that thought exchange platform, but it was also sort of to get a gauge of what this committee felt was the most important needs to be addressed. So again, you know, that whole process that Jackie took us through was a really great learning opportunity for me, is that the question really matters. and getting that question right really matters, which will help us be productive. And so knowing all that now, we will, this, like I said, that question on the top there, based on your experience, that's our old question. So what I'm looking to the committee now, and I've had some great feedback on, what should I be considering when I'm reframing that question to go out to the greater community?
From Aaron's comments earlier there, can I throw out a question?
Sure.
See if that's something that might be built upon. What does a COVID resilient community look like?
I'm writing, sorry.
I was just trying to reference back to Jackie's slide earlier and some of Aaron's comments, but I don't know how that question is something to build off of potentially.
Jackie, do you have some input on that?
I would just say at this moment, why don't we run through using how might we? So I think if we start off with and we could all throw up some how might we's, but it could be, like going back to Stuart's comment, it could be how might we build a COVID community or a resilient community after COVID, or how might we, Jill and I mentioned, we were talking earlier, how might we make life in Pemberton even better? So we can, starting with, as you guys said, some kind of and I 100% agree with the people that said we need to have empathy in the opening comment. We really have to validate how difficult this is for everyone. Otherwise, people are going to get mad at us right away. So that part absolutely has to happen, because this is unprecedented what's happened. And we just really need to acknowledge how difficult it is for each and every person. So however we make that empathetic statement is really important. And then going into, so we have a question for you, knowing all of this, we have a question for you, and then we pose a question. If we use how might we, it's a good one, because it leads to solutions. Like if we ask people how might we, it immediately, they start thinking in a creative way. And yes, they might say, build a pool. How might we build a pool? That could be in there, but that's okay. I think just giving people an opportunity to say, how might we make, the services in Pemberton easier to access for whatever it is. So I think that could be a way to, if everyone could start thinking right now about maybe starting it with that, then we'll probably land on a pretty good question.
Erin and Natalie, maybe what I'll do is I'll sort of draft that preface to the question, and I'd love your input on, making sure that we've got that compassion piece and understanding piece in the question. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Great.
So if I could add something there, I think in terms of the question, I agree with everything everybody said and what Jackie just finished with. The original question was very much about what can the village address. We're going away from that a little bit in the sense. I think the two things that excite me most about this committee is A, just this group of people and what we can do and the energy that's coming out already. But B is the idea that we're trying to empower our community, that our approach, the way we're starting to go as a group is not just, okay, we're going to come together as a group of thinkers and see how we can solve problems. We're engaging the community and we're empowering the community to be part of that. And, the same thing about keeping this question open, about reaching out to all these different people within our community. I think that could be one of the biggest legacies from this group is create a system, create a culture in our town where people are active. I mean, we've got lots of active people. A lot of us here have all sat on a whole bunch of different groups and committees, but really get people to be proactively finding solutions and working towards building that stronger community. That quote that we put on the original post that Rodney put up earlier, that's what's exciting about it, is how can we really light a fire under our community members and create momentum where we're always getting involved with each other to solve some of these problems. So I think the question definitely needs to be a little less village centric and should somehow, I don't know, I don't have the right words for you, but should somehow include you know, what can we as a community, you know, Jackie said, how might we? So how might we, obviously not just the task force, but how might we as a community become stronger and more proactive and all that sort of thing? I don't think that all belongs in the question, but I think there needs to be an element of that. Does that make sense?
It's Mark. Perhaps a question as simple as, what makes you want to live in Pemberton? And I think from that you'll get a broad response of all of the good things. We want to be careful of all the negative. You know, asking for a pool that we can't afford would be somewhat of a negative. So, you know, just give them a broad question that everybody probably wants to answer. You know, why are you here? Why are you living here? What brings you here? What brought you here? And that should give us a good reference point as to, you know, what we need to do to make it better.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Jill?
Yes.
Actually, can we go back to full screen just in case I feel like I'm missing people here?
Yes, I'm sorry. I spaced on that.
And that way, because I can't tell if I'm jumping in front. Oh yeah, we got all kinds of hands here going on. So Nikki, Ryan.
I just wanted to be, I'm not trying to be a damper the mood of the group, but I would need to bring us back to the task force and the goals. And really it's about providing strategic recommendations and identify community-led initiatives to guide recovery and relief efforts related to COVID-19 pandemic. I worry that if we get too general on our question, that we're not actually fulfilling the terms of reference of this, whether or not there's another phase or whether we change our question as we move through this. But this was the immediate need for the creation of this. And I'm just trying to be careful not to lose sight of that. Sorry, those are just my 2 cents there.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So in regards to the question, and I'm pretty sure this hadn't been brought up, but think about a broad question. And what Nikki just said is that I feel a very broad question for the community could be just how might we build a C-19 resilient community? And from that question, we can branch out into groups with how each person feels Pemberton could be more resilient to C-19, because we've seen what happened and we learn from those lessons of where the gaps were, and then we take those questions and then everybody splits off to their subcommittees and starts answering the questions following the strategic play, that circle, which I find is very helpful. That's fantastic. I wish I'd known about that 10 years ago. But I think that question is broad enough to answer what Nikki just said, because that's why the committee was formed. And if we can build Pemberton to be a C-19 resilient community, which was my understanding of why the committee was formed, then we can move forward. From that, we brainstorm all the different ideas of we need more childcare, we need to support tourism, and those are the resiliency bits that we pull away from this, and then we put them into play. Please correct me if I'm wrong from the group.
Yeah, I like the idea of introducing resiliency, Ryan. I think that's really smart. And maybe we don't even need to limit it to C-19 resiliency, right? Maybe we can broaden it out. How do we become, what are the challenges we need to tackle to become resilient? And just echoing or sort of reiterating what you said, Mike, the thing that's been rolling around in my mind in regards to the framing of the question, Jill, that you put in front of us and tested last time is just 2 things. One, making sure that there isn't an expectation set that the village is going to fix all these problems, and that it's coming back to that charter of broad accountability and community solving the problems. And the other one, not setting the expectation that we're going to tackle every single problem, but we want to get a long list.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, and Ryan, I think you, and taking on from Nikki's point as well, I think you know, the Village of Pemberton is a large organization itself, and I'm wondering if some of the conversation around this task force needs to define itself that we're not necessarily solving the internal capacity of the village, the internal operational foundation of the village, its business continuity to endure a pandemic like COVID-19? Or are we simply focusing externally of the social issues and cracks and constraints that have come about from COVID-19? So just putting that out there, that let's remember, I think this task force is very externally focused. And that's certainly something we grapple with at SCSS. There's been some internal constraints and challenges that have unfolded due to COVID-19 in terms of our business continuity and our ability to withstand a pandemic. But we have to also, you know, reflect that out in terms of how the community is resilient in the face of COVID-19. So no more so than just a comment there.
Yeah, I totally agree there, Jay. And I mean, a couple of things, you know, like Ryan said, well, what have we learned from COVID-19? And then like Rodney said, but we're trying to build resiliency as a community. This has got to work no matter what the pandemic or crisis is, from forest fires to, like, we're trying to build that fabric and that strength and community and all those relationships and collaboration, all that stuff. We're trying to build that so that we are stronger as a community, no matter what we're facing, in good times, bad times, all that stuff, right? So I think it's, you know, the question is, having lived the last few months in this new territory that we're in, what have we learned, and how do we build a stronger community? You know, resilience, the word becomes such a catchword. I try to stay away from resilient a little bit, but that's what we're working on here. How can we be resilient in the face of no matter what the crisis is? So I think that's really important. But Jay, if you could solve the capacity issues at the village, that'd be appreciated as well. I think Ryan had his hand, and then Jackie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, I think you've got a point there with using the word resilient too much. It becomes overused. But building a stronger, maybe like just how might we build a stronger community in the face of a emergency? Something like that. And that goes to Rodney's point, where we're not just concentrating on C-19, we're concentrating on any emergency. And as you know, the people of the village will know that we have, you know, we live in a beautiful valley, but it comes with issues, whether it's flooding, fires, now COVID. I mean, this is a framework, if built, if we put the time, like, I know we'll put the time and effort into it, but this framework could help us with any emergency. Like I said, flooding, you're going to have people that are struggling mentally, on a mental health aspect with it. Pandemic, forest fires, I mean, this framework could help us throughout many different emergencies. So I like that Rodney brought that up, because that's a very good point. If we go broad, then we cover more than just one problem.
Right, Jackie?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say, one of the things that some of the grandfathers of creative problem solving often say is that if a 10-year-old doesn't understand your question, it's a bad question. And so the thinking there is that a kid should be able to walk in the room and see what we're working on and be able to help ideate on it. So perhaps the word resilient, and especially now hearing you guys say it's being overused, we know that that's what we're going for, but the word stronger is perhaps simpler. And I was just thinking that in the preamp, to go back to Nikki's point of making sure that we make it very clear what we're working on, which is reopening after COVID, we can do that in the first part of the question, which a couple of people are going to work on, making sure that that first part has the empathy built into it, so that when we ask the question, people will know, okay, it's about COVID. So something simple could be, how might we create a stronger community going forward? That maybe leaves it open enough, but yet specific enough that that might be where we're going. Because what we're really looking for is we're trying to unearth problems. We're like being problem spotters. We're trying to dig it up. And it's not bad that we're going to dig up a lot of dirt, and that's okay. That's all what problem solving is about. We don't want to sweep it under the rug. We want to pull it up, because if we pull it out into the open for exploration, that's how we can solve things. So we are definitely going to unearth a lot of stuff, and it might be, you know, it might not be pretty, but that's okay. That's what we're here to do. So let's look at all of it. And then as soon as we start, you know, kind of uncovering it, then we'll start clustering it, and then we'll start putting it into themes, and we'll start, you know, kind of saying, this is the task force for this theme. But don't be surprised if the people that work on one thing end up coming up with ideas that are very similar to somebody working on a completely different problem, because that often happens, because remember, it is a system. So it'll be interesting. I'm super interested to see how much crossover there is, because I think that there will be quite a bit. But I think that that's, so anyway, back to the question, keep it simple, and that'll be more powerful. Because whenever you're dealing with complexity, to make a complex question just makes it confusing. The brain can't figure it out. So keep the question simple.
Yeah, I totally agree. I got Judith and Ryan.
Oh, Judith and Ryan, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry guys. I like the question you said, Jackie, about how might we be a stronger community. And I just thought something simple like following the, and maybe this isn't a simple word, following the unprecedented experiences we have all gone through with COVID-19, because back to what we were originally here for. And that brings us all as a community together, and we've all experienced it, but in different ways.
Thanks, Judith. Go ahead, Ryan.
Actually, my question was for Jacqueline. I wanted to write down what you said, but I missed some of it. And it was, if a 10-year-old can't understand your problem, then you're asking the wrong question. Was that it?
Yeah, so research has found that, and I can give you lots of innovations that are perfect examples of this, including Irish Spring soap and spray on wax at car washes. But as soon as you have a complex problem, you need to drill it down to a very simple question. And the reason is because as we get older, we start wordsmithing everything. And, you know, you guys have probably gone to meetings where you sit and you dissect the meaning of trust or something crazy like that. So the idea here is the simpler that you can state the question, the easier it is for people then to start looking at ideas or possibilities. Because the brain is actually very inefficient. The part of the brain where we do problem solving is actually very inefficient. And this is why we tend to default back to things we've done in the past. So by restating the question in the simplest way possible, but making it open-ended so that it leads to possibilities, that's really what we're going for. So I'll just give you guys an example. My niece said to me, she was 14, and she said, you know, Annie, Jackie, my life would be so much better, but I don't have a horse. And I said to her, I'm sure her parents wanted to kill me after this, but I just said, let's restate that. Up until now, I do not have a horse. And she went, oh, I love that. Up until now, I do not have a horse, because it allows for all of those possibilities. And that's really all we're doing in stating this. But Judith, to go back to your point, I think that what you had said is really key to the beginning of the statement, making sure that the starting of the question has the empathy, frames it up so that people know exactly what we're talking about, asking the question in a simple way, and then letting them run with it. Because if they say, well, we should have a pool, it doesn't matter, because they can say whatever they want. So going back to Mark's point about not setting the community up that we're going to solve all of them. You know, this is like kids make their wish list for Santa Claus every year. Doesn't mean that Santa's going to bring it. There's only certain things we're going to do, but we're going to cluster things and work on things. And who knows what could, because we don't know. This is a situation where we don't know what we don't know. And right now we have no idea what amazing things we might create. And we're not going to tell them that because we're going to do that on our subcommittees. But I'm super hopeful. I'm a very optimistic person, and I'm thinking if we put these people together to work on these things, something fantastic is going to come out of it. I don't know what it is, but I am pretty positive that the brain power and the opportunity will help us get there.
Jill, are you looking for even more specific direction, or is this a good start?
That's perfectly, that's fantastic. So what I would do, so Natalie and Erin, I'll look to you to sort of just make sure I'm hitting the mark on sort of the preface on empathy. And then Jackie, if you don't mind, maybe you and I can just like hone in on that question and just make sure we've considered the MTF's input. And then, yeah, so just so the group knows, Nikki and I talked about this before. So what we would like to do, again, talking about how we need to sort of bring this back to council, is we were thinking that we would maybe bring this question to council on Tuesday, just to get their support so they know what we're asking. Nikki, did you want to add to any of that? And then once we get council's approval on that, then I can like pull the trigger on that fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. And then what we would need to do as well, obviously, when we're looking, we cluster sort of the feedback we're getting into themes, and with the subcommittees, then we would need to have this committee recommend to council that these subcommittees be created, and then that would need to go to council. So it would be all right if we're sort of working at how those committees look like and get individuals who are interested in it, but it will need to be formally, I guess, approved by council. So if we can just track it to where our next meetings are, and potentially we might need to have a special council meeting on that.
So just to, because there was a lot of information there, I just sort of wanted to summarize basically what we are looking to the group for. Again, I'll be leading on a couple of you to help me just sort of refine that community question. And then once we get council approval, then we'll be sharing the question to the community, and I'll certainly be leaning on each of you to circulate that question to your networks, just so we get a really robust and fulsome response. And then once that happens, then there'll be some work that staff does as far as, you know, analyzing and grouping those responses. And as Nikki indicated, we'll just need to sort of go back to council, confirm those with them, and then we'll come back and then we'll start the exercise of everybody sort of, you know, self-appointing themselves to working groups that interest them. What were the 3 I's, Jackie? That interest them, that they have influence over, and that they have the imagination to contribute to. So that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions about all of that or any of that?
Can you show the full screen again, Jill? Go ahead, Judith.
Yep. Is it possible to get this stuff that Jackie and Rodney created? This I thought it was great, and I'd love to look through it again after this meeting.
Definitely, I will definitely be circulating the PowerPoint.
Thanks, and thank you both for all that work, and you too.
And if anybody wants to do the assessment online, maybe just send me an email and I'll send you a link that you can use. I'm hoping, you know, this is something that we do, but I think that right now it's sort of like we're all in a boat that could be sinking, and if we have a bail that everyone can use to help, I want to give you my bail design. So that's kind of the idea. So if you want to use the assessment with your team, I welcome you to go ahead and do that, because it can be helpful in the circle. And I didn't circle back. Did people kind of see themselves as I was going around where you might fit into that creative problem solving, like the one that you prefer? Yeah, a few people? Okay. All right, well, that's available to you. And my thinking was that, depending on how we divide this up, but I can kind of be a resource for different teams as you start going through the process with the subgroups when we get to it. that was.
Awesome. Rodney, on the agenda, there was another note about the North Star vision. Did you cover that already, or did you want to throw something else on that?
I think I probably covered it enough. Just to reiterate, in case it wasn't clear, is that there's definitely bubbling appetite for some kind of North Star that can overlay, everything we do and think about, whether that's, the village and SLRD and other organizations, but, even each of us in our own businesses and decisions. But it's too big to tackle solely in this task force, which is what gave us the idea of surfacing issues and breaking them out. So I think that'll probably end up being one of the things on the list, and something I'd love to put my own name against in some capacity. So.
And that's a good point, actually, Rodney. Just around the question that we'll be putting into the community. So we encourage these task force members here, like when we do ask that community question, please answer the question and speak to sort of what your own experiences have been, and so we can capture your thoughts in that as well.
Is everybody good and clear on the resource sharing, the Google file that Jill set up? If we want to share information like what came out after the last meeting or the stuff that's coming from the work that's being done. Is everybody good on that?
I haven't really spoke to that yet, Mike. I haven't emailed the group about it because I just wanted to have a discussion first. All of you have been sending some great resource documents, things you've been hearing in the community, which has been excellent. And I thought that maybe a good way that we could start sharing documents is through a Google Drive. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's basically sort of like an online portal where you can just sort of plunk resources or articles that you think that we should be reading or podcasts we should be listening to. I can also upload things like this PowerPoint. So it's just sort of an online hub for all of us to share resources on. The only snag, do you have to have a Gmail, Rodney? You do?
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Okay. So what I'll do is if everyone's comfortable with that platform, I'll send you an invite. And if you're not familiar with Google Docs, I can chat with you offline and talk to you about it, how to access it. And then at the same time, if you don't have the time, you can send me whatever you want to be shared on that online hub and I can upload it for you. But I just thought it'd be an easy access point for all of us to share resources together. So as an example, Jackie, that really critical information that you had shared with respect to what you're hearing in the seniors committee, I've actually already uploaded that into a Google Doc. So when we do have our working groups, that'll be a great place to sort of go back and refer to those documents that might help some of your inform some of your problem solving. Is there anyone that's not comfortable with that? Okay, you're good with that. Great. So what I'll do is I'll send everybody an invite following this meeting to that Google Drive for you to access.
Bill, if I can make a suggestion, and maybe you're already on top of that, but I think because I anticipate that a lot of people are going to have things to contribute, it might be good to just categorize it so that it's easy for people to kind of scan through those resources.
And I've already kind of done that. I've done like agendas, minutes, resources, feedback, I think. I've already started to do that, but feel free, like if there's a folder you want to add or you want to manipulate it in a way, please go for it. This is our shared folder, not mine. So feel free to change it.
So everybody's good with that? Okay. I think before we get to it though, one of the last items of business will be talking about meetings and frequency and all that. Jill, has all your stuff been covered?
We should probably get a resolution if I could.
Yeah, I'm getting
First,
there.
Okay.
I know you want your resolution. We'll get you a resolution.
Oh, I won't say anything.
But I just wanted to make sure that from Jill, Jackie, and Rodney that we've covered everything you wanted to go before we start looking at resolutions and wrap up. All good. Okay, so let's get Nikki a resolution. So we need a resolution to recommend to Village of Pemberton Council that the process as laid out. Now, I don't know how much detail you want in the resolution here, Nikki, in terms of the process itself, but that the process as laid out in the subcommittee format
I've rethought a little bit on how maybe we might want to address these.
Okay.
I think as far as an overall understanding of the process, which might actually involve a bit of a smaller presentation of that, a couple of slides potentially on that process so that they understand what the process is. So I'm okay if we do that without going too deep fundamentally. But what I think we do need to have a resolution for is that staff finalize the question and bring it forward at the next regular meeting of council on July 14th. That I think is a clear next step. But I think that we're going to need, as far as priorities and working groups, those will be separate resolutions that we'll need to make at our next meeting once we have those decided. So I'm happy if the group wants to let council know what this initial process is and get their support of the overall process. And then we would bring something more specific back as we have those details from the question.
So you don't need a resolution. You just want us to update council in terms of the process we're taking.
No, I think it's fine. That staff or that, well, first, if we could get, I'm thinking out loud.
We need to resolve the update council.
Well, no, for them to fundamentally, I think to approve the overall process as presented at this meeting. We could say that. I don't want to get it too much into the details because as we get the information from the question, we might need to tweak a few things, or we might, we're really at the preliminary piece right now. So I don't want things to be so certain and hard fast that we're now having to get separate and unwind this resolution. So if overall, this will obviously probably lie on Jill's plate to provide a small overview, if you're comfortable with it, if we're going to have to bring a report forward with the question anyway, just to outline for council what that process will be. It's already developed in the slides here.
Do we want to mention or do we want to reference the subcommittee system?
Not yet.
At
very high level, because I think we want to establish the subcommittees once we know how they've been, the themes and clustered. That's going to be more specific, that we would recommend to council that subcommittees on, I'm just throwing things out there, daycare, mental health or something would be established. That would be more specific moving forward, but the process does sort of reference that that's where we're headed.
And we need and that council support or approves the community question, right?
So I don't feel from a process standpoint, we don't need, I don't think we need a motion from this group. I think we need to present what Nikki said here, present top of the waves version of the process. This is how we're going, and then get a resolution from council to support the direction being taken by the MTF. But,
okay, but I think it should come from here because we just need to.
We're recommending to council to support our direction?
I think staff present to the council the direction and process of the MTF.
Welcome to our world, everybody. You should all join council. They're really
well, just so everyone knows, when we go back in history and we go, what happened here? When we have the minutes to go, oh, that's what happened there. And then you can follow the chain on where the decision gets made at the council table. You can kind of take a breath and go, oh, I get what they were doing back then.
All right, so I'm looking for a motion from somebody in this group to present to council the process as laid out and seek approval to carry on in this direction. Moved by Judith, seconded by Stuart. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. There you go.
Okay, and then I need one more. That staff finalize the development of the community question and bring it forward at the July 14th regular meeting of council.
Moved by Stuart, seconded by Meredith. All in favor, opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right. Again, we're going to get into the next meeting conversation in a sec, but I just thought maybe let's take a second and if there's any last thoughts, how everybody feels about today, about the direction we're going. Are we all good? Everybody happy with what's going on? Okay. Okay, well, in terms of next meetings, one of the things we talked about was trying to set, it's so hard to coordinate all of us, and instead of sending poor Jill off with doodle polls every 10 minutes, if we could try to establish a regular time and date Maybe make it a monthly meeting was one of the considerations, instead of just trying to pick random dates. So that's one suggestion I want to throw out to the group. And having said that, does that make sense? Does a month from now make sense in terms of the steps we just put forward? And I'll look to Jill and Jackie and everybody else here. So we're going to go back, we're going to do the council meeting, we're going to develop the question, or not in that order, but develop the question, put it out to the community, organize those thoughts. Then this group will check in terms of where our interests lie. Is that a month turnaround? Is that something we're all comfortable with?
I think so.
Rodney, Jackie, you guys have been deep in this process. Do you think that's a good turnaround?
I usually move a lot quicker than that. I don't know about Rodney. What do you think, Rodney?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing, but it's a very different environment to the one I'm used to working in. You know, if we're leaving in a month, I'd love to do 3 weeks personally and push ourselves, because, you know, COVID could be over.
Yeah,
but
that'd be a loss.
if we're doing it in 3 weeks, I think what you just laid out makes sense. If we're doing it in 4 weeks, it would be awesome if the small groups had already connected and done one thing. And I think, you know, the way I normally work is through a Google Doc and some emails. It wouldn't be hard to get an initial team and leader together and start some problem definition, but then there's a little bit of coordination. So I'd say either push to do it a bit sooner and get some momentum, or have a higher expectation on what we bring back to the next meeting. Would be my...
I tend to agree, and I'm always happy to push Nikki and Jill and trying to get things happening a little faster. They love that about me. But I tend to agree, especially just to develop those subcommittees. If we can get that next step done, then I think there's lots of work that can be carried out between the next meeting. So I'm seeing a fair few nodding heads. Is this group comfortable to accelerate? We'll put out some dates for closer to 3 weeks. And then we can hopefully get those subcommittees worked out and we could all carry on. Does that make sense to everybody?
And Mike, maybe we revisit that like question of our frequency of meetings after that, because I think initially there's going to be a lot of legwork that we have to do to sort of get us set up. And then maybe after that we talk about like a set, you know, every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of every month or something.
Yeah. Okay. I'm good with that. Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
Quick question. So how long do we feel we're going to need the question to be out there in order to really gather some information, the 50 responses-ish, to be able to start looking?
So what we talked about is that question would be out there for an undefined period of time, just given how everything changes.
Yeah.
But what we thought would be the trigger to us starting to cluster, analyze, and prioritize was when we hit maybe 50 responses.
Okay. So I'm just thinking, because the question would go out the 14th or the 15th.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a week away. And then our next meeting, if it was like the 27th-ish, I'm just trying to time it because I think it's important. Our next council meeting is the 28th, right? So even if we have to walk in a report on the 28th, I'm happy with that, but I'm just trying to see, will that give us enough time to get feedback from the community? And if it is, that's great. I'm trying to work it into if we need to have another special meeting, or if we can get it on our council next meeting.
So I think that you'll see a surge within, I like to think, the optimism that we'll see a lot of response in that first week. Like that's when the information tends to come in, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Jill, but yeah, I think if we can get that question out following the council meeting, then we're well placed to have this group meet again in 2-3 weeks.
I think that given we've got 11 people that are going to really push for responses here, and if we can at least make a personal goal of having 5 people respond or get 5 people to respond in each of our groups, then I think we'll hit that 50-person threshold fairly easily. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I really like that idea. What you just said there, Jill, is if each one of us has a kind of a personal goal to get 5 responses for that question, I think that's a really great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And we can obviously take all the answers from the general public as well once the village puts it on their website. But I think that right there is a good goal to set 5 responses from 5 people that we know personally.
Even if you have to linger over them and make them answer it on the computer.
I have a good way of getting people to answer questions. I usually bring a drink or something to drink with me.
Love it.
Okay, so.
Oh, Jackie has something to say, Mike.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, are we doing like Survey Monkey? Like how are we asking, are we just asking the question or are we actually formalizing it with some kind of a system that we're gathering the information on? Did I miss that part?
No, I haven't put my brain to what platform we're going to be asking the question to. That's going to be part of my behind the scenes work.
Okay, I can help you with that too. I mean, we use Survey Monkey and it's really nice. Does all the analytics for you.
Okay, great.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Rodney probably has 1 million that he uses as well, so.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Rodney?
Can I make a suggestion to Jill? With your Google Doc file you're setting up, I was wondering if the group would be willing, like if I go and get my 5 responses, I can then put those 5 responses into that Google Doc and everybody can see them.
I would wait, Ryan, until Jill and Jackie have discussed about what the platform's going to be. And the idea would be like, if it's a Survey Monkey, then like Jackie says, it all gets synthesized through the Survey Monkey. So we don't need to put it on the Google Drive. It would just be through whatever survey platform we use.
Well, no, I meant the 5 responses that each of the group members pointed out.
Yeah, but we're going to be encouraging people to use the platform that we're putting out. So it's not, we don't want direct responses to Ryan. We're saying Ryan's 5 best friends are going to go out and take part in the survey on Survey Monkey and that's where the information.
Okay. But having said that though, we will be like after those sort of like 50 responses we get, we will be plunking those into Google Doc because that's going to be the list that this group is going to look at and start self-appointing themselves to tackle.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Natalie.
I just wanted to just bring this to everybody's attention as well, that we should make the survey accessible to people because not everyone has the technological skills. And especially in Pemberton, from my experience, there's a great deal of individuals that don't have access to technology right now. And especially with the libraries not being fully open and being able to access the computers there, we're going to miss a big chunk of the population. So we need to also think about how we can collect that information in other ways rather than just on the computer or on the internet.
And Natalie, I'd love any suggestions on how we can hit those people if you have them.
Okay.
I think one of the things that we might have to do is, since we all on this committee have a computer, is that if we pick our 5 people, we could actually type in their responses for them. Because I'm also thinking the senior population too may not know how to use the system. You know, it could be a little overwhelming. So maybe we could have some paper pencil versions somewhere. I'm not sure, but even just reaching out and doing it over the phone.
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, well, I will contact the senior group, and if anybody hasn't got access, that couldn't access, we used it at the library. I've forgotten the name, the monkey, whatever it is. But the other thing we could do is just one day, and I'm prepared to do this for a couple of hours, do a paper one outside the grocery store or the liquor store at distance with a mask, you know, and I'd be prepared to do that to help out.
That's a great idea, Judith, and we could do that at the farmer's market.
Yeah.
Other things, that's a good spot on a Friday afternoon.
Friday'd be great.
Yeah.
And Jill, I'm happy to have a chat with you offline around giving my staff an opportunity to provide the survey through clients or Better at Home, all of our volunteers. There's ways we can get out through our networks.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Jay.
Awesome, you guys. So we're going to circle back with a date then. We're shooting for not later than 3 weeks is what our goal is as a group. And we'll send out some dates inside that 3-week period and see if we could get it turned around. Go ahead, dude.
Sorry, just a quick thought. Are you going to put a question about age on the thing so that we don't get everybody in one age group responding to this. You know, if you got 50 seniors, it would be very focused to that instead of what you want is right across the spectrum.
I think that, yeah, that's a good point, Judith. Because obviously, like with Think Exchange, it's very focused on the question and isn't focused at all on demographic at all. Whereas if we choose to go with a platform like SurveyMonkey, there is the opportunity to grab a couple of very quick demographic questions, perhaps like age, where do you live? I don't know, something else. So yeah, I think it's definitely, it'll be dependent on what platform we choose, but I think that if there is the opportunity to ask those demographic questions, then we should probably do so. I think the one thing I want to be really careful of, and I love your input on this, is that I just don't want to have it to be too time consuming right now, because we really want to be focused on what the issues are. So we can, you know, start our process. And I don't want that to be a barrier for people like, oh, this is like a half an hour survey. I want it to be very quick initially. And I think that gathering those demographics down the line will be really key and critical. But right now I think it should be question focused. But I think that if we do SurveyMonkey, then we can ask age to make sure, like we had talked about earlier, Judith, too, is like making sure it's a fulsome and robust representation of our community.
Yeah, and let's hope with the question that you ask, you can roughly tell the age group from what comes out of it, I think, in certain ways. If it's all on childcare, then you know you've got the majority of the younger people. And if it's all on looking for housing for down the road and assisted housing, you know you've got the seniors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell Derek he's only allowed to fill out one answer.
Will do.
Sorry, I lost my thought there. Yes, I agree with you 100%, Jill. Let's keep it simple, because there are a lot of surveys out there, and I've had to force myself to do the one with my son from the school board, or, you know, and understandably, lots of organizations are asking. So I think we want to make it fun and quick and easy for people to do. Okay. Any last thoughts? Thank you so much, everybody. I think that was a really good 2 hours. Thanks again. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay, you're going to do a motion to adjourn.
Oh my God, motion to adjourn. Moved by Stuart, seconded by Judith. All in favor. Thanks, you guys. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.